Yes,
Yes, sir.
yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Are you all ready? Okay. Today, uh, we are going to have our discussion on Blog 8, MEG-11 Blog 8. And the novelist on uh, whom we will concentrate our discussion is Scott Momade, Momaday, Scott and the novel on which we will focus our uh, interpretation is a house made of dawn, a house, House, house made of DAWN, made of dawn, a house made of dawn. The name of the novelist, as I told you, is Scott Momaday, and his work, A House Made of Dawn. So, uh, before we go for a discussion on the novelist and his work, it is important to uh, know some of the uh, it is very important to know some of the uh, actually some of the important things like origin of Native American literature, development of oral literature, theme of oral literature, genres of oral literature. Uh, we are supposed to know in brief on these points. Dear students, we'll make an attempt to focus our discussion. We'll make an attempt to focus our discussion on American Indian literature. American Indian literature. We'll make an attempt to focus our discussion on American Indian literature, its traditions, themes, genres, techniques. I repeat it again. As I told you, before we go to discuss something about Scott Momaday's A House Made of Dawn, it is important on our part to know some of the things like the origin of Native American literature, number one, number two, oral literature, number three, theme of oral literature, number four, genres of oral literature. And as I told you, as I told you, we'll make an attempt to focus our discussion, focus our interpretation on American Indian literature, its traditions, themes, genres, and techniques. Uh, Please bear in mind that it was predominantly oral literature, celebrating the life, beliefs, aspirations, successes, and frustrations of the Indians over many millennia, many uh, uh, many millennia. American Indian literature existed uh, and flourished long before the European colonized America. Please try to understand. It was predominantly oral literature that celebrated the life, beliefs, aspirations, success, and frustrations of the Indians over many years. American Indian literature existed. Over many years, American Indian literature existed and flourished long before the European colonized America. Long before the European colonized America, this thing existed. This thing existed. So, among the Indians living in America, There were between 1000 to 2000 languages. There were between 1000 to 2000 languages and as many cultures. As many cultures. However, at the time of the European uh, contact, there were some 300 cultural groups who spoke over 200 languages. Ah, so, uh, as you, I actually remind you again that uh, before we go for a discussion about Scott Melody's A House Made of Dawn, it is relevant on our part to know something about the origin of Native American literature, the its oral literature, theme of oral literature, genres and techniques of oral literatures. And that is why I told you that we will make an attempt to focus our discussion on American Indian literature, its tradition, themes, genres, techniques. And as I told you, it was predominantly oral literature, which celebrated for years together, uh, before the European colonized America. Before European colonized America, it existed hundreds of years ago. So these were further reduced to, as I told you, however, at the time of European contact, there were some 300 cultural groups, 300 cultural groups who spoke over 200 languages, and these were further reduced to 150 by middle of the 20th century. And uh, these surviving languages, 150 surviving languages, have been classified into 42 language families. Ah, so some of the Indian languages, such as Olmec, Maya, Japotec, developed their own writing system. Uh, some of the Indian languages, such as Olmec, 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 comma, M capital, MAY, Maya, and uh, Japotec, JAPOTC, they developed their own writing systems. So they uh, used uh, ideographic glyphs, ideographic comparable to ancient Egyptian and Chinese writing system. Who? Olmec, Maya, and Japotec. They used ideographic glyphs comparable to ancient Egyptian or Chinese writing system. Mm, the Mayas produced paper books known as codices, which can be folded like a screen. So, so far the origin of Native American literature is concerned. So far the origin of Native American literature is concerned, the European settlers wrongly assumed that American literature started with them in the 16th or 17th century. It started and flourished uh, many centuries, perhaps millennia before the European arrival. I have already told you, before the European colonized America, such languages existed, and uh, American literature begins with the first human perception of American landscape expressed and preserved in language. So the history of Native American literature, the history of Native American literatures reflects, very important, the tribal cultures, the experience and imagination uh, of its authors. It also tells us something about the relations between the Indian tribes and the whites. We are discussing on origin of Native American literature. So European settlers, they wrongly assumed that American literature started with them in the 16th or 17th century. But In fact, it started and flourished many centuries, perhaps years uh, before the European arrival. So, given the long history of Native Americans, uh, oral literature in several forms was dominant. Which form of literature? Oral literature. Oral literature. Actually, oral literature uh, in several forms was dominant in many cultures. So, the oral tradition influenced even the written works. Ah, the oral tradition influenced the written works. The central belief of Native Americans, the central belief of Native Americans to whichever tribe they belonged, whatever to whichever tribe they belong. As I told you, I again, for your information, I again tell you that the history of Native American literature reflect the tribal cultures, the tribal experience, tribal imagination, and therefore the central belief of Native Americans to whichever tribe they belonged was the need to live in harmony with the physical and spiritual universe in their understanding. Breath, speech, verbal art, song, oratory are closely connected. So, in fact, in many cultures, these are often signified. These are, as I named, uh, the breath, speech, verbal art, these are all these all signified by the same word, by the same word. For instance, uh, in a particular culture, Navajo culture, the emergence myth shows that in the beginning there were the word and the thing, the symbol and the object. Ah, so for the Navajo's culture, symbol is word, and word and word is means by which substance is organized and transformed. So oral actually we are talking of oral culture, oral literature, and and therefore the interrelation among knowledge, interrelation among thought, interrelation among speech in Navajo culture is expressed in their beginning of earth song, expressed in their beginning of earth songs. Uh, so oral literature actually remained the dominant in actually Indian American literature. So let us now consider some of the important and recurrent themes in the oral literature. We will now consider some of the important and recurrent themes in the oral literatures uh, and of the Native Americans. These literatures voice these literatures voice a strong desire. Which literature? The oral literatures of the Native Americans. Oral literature of the Native Americans. Hmm. The literatures voice a strong desire for harmony, which is related to their deep reverence uh, for land. In the way to Rainy Mountain, Momade says, oral literature, once in his life a man ought to concentrate his mind upon the remembered earth. I believe he ought to give himself up to a particular landscape in his experience, and so on, so on. So, oral literature, mm, uh, American Indian literature reflects the also mythology and past history as well as the experiences of the present. Uh, American literature reflects American literature uh, reflects American literature reflects the mythology and past history as well as the experiences of the present. For instance, there is considerable improvisation each time a performer begins. He does not repeat what he had memorized. He composes afresh on each occasion. So, oral literature are held uh, sacred by the tribes, and outsiders are not allowed access to them. Very important. Oral literature are held sacred, and outsiders are not allowed to have any access on them. So, in the performance of American Indian verbal arts, in the performance of American Indian verbal arts, audience participation is very important. Audience participation is very important since the audience is bound to the performer. And so far the students, so far the um, genres of oral literature is concerned, American Indian oral literature uses many genres. American Indian oral literature uses many genres. The most popular, perhaps, uh, is ritual drama. Ritual drama, RITUL, ritual drama, in which chants, 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 ceremonies, and rituals play a vital role, play a vital part. American Indian oral literature uses many genres, and the most popular genre they used is ritual drama, in which CHANTS chants, ceremonies, and ritual play a very important part. Words are endowed with occult power. They are the key to the idea of this of a song. The sacred language used during these rituals, mm, uh, which is which was very hard to understand by the common people. It is meant for communication among medicine men and their helpers only. So, in certain tribes, uh, common words are transformed into sacred vocabulary. In certain types, common words are used, common words are transformed into sacred vocabulary by certain linguistic processes like affixation, reduplication, inversion, the use of a variety of stylistic features. So, these are the techniques the uh, American Indian oral literature used. Ah, and the ritual drama are performed by priest, by singers, by shamans, by special groups. The ritual dramas, one of the genres we are discussing. The ritual dramas are performed by priests, singers, and special groups. Priests are found among planters and medicine men. They do not need inspiration to perform. Uh, Shamans are found among hunter gatherers. See how the tribal actually themes, tribal actually cultures, these genres reflect. They perform spirit fight, SPRIT, spirit fight, flight, spirit flight, find lost souls, cure illness, foretell future events. So these are some of the occult power. mm, uh, Generally used in ritual drama, which was the most popular genre. A second form of oral literature is song, SONG, song. A second form of oral literature is song. In fact, it is the largest part of the oral literature. Song, the second form of genre, they used uh, uh, in American Indian oral literature, song, and in fact, it is the largest part of the oral literature. Songs are the greatest pleasure for mm, uh, uh, many tribes. For them, every phase of life is expressed in music. Every phase of life is expressed in music. Songs are so much a part of their daily life that if an Indian visits another reservation, of one of the first questions asked on his return is, "What new songs did you learn?" Ah, this was the question uh, which was asked to them. What new songs did you learn? So, if the Indian visits another reservation, one of the first question asked on his return, what new songs did you learn? And therefore, songs celebrate major events in human life. According to the opinion of some of the uh, experts, the songs which was used as an important genre in uh, Indian American literature. The songs celebrate major events in human life, birth and naming, arrival of puberty, healing, death, burial. Songs are also part of the fertility rites which ensure survival of the group. So, the uh, the narratives, these narratives emphasize external behavior. Characters are one dimensional, and they rarely express thought or emotion. Settings are simple. Settings are simple. The style is very simple, and narratives are compressed and very episodic, episode based, and these are there is consistencies of time, there is coherence in events, and there is details of the theme used in their used in their genre. So this is, as we discussed, we should not have our actually discussion. Uh, mm, uh, we should not take more time on discussing the origin oral literature. We should have some idea about oral literature, about theme or oral literature, genres and uh, uh, genres of oral literature. So now uh, we will divert our attention. We will now divert our attention uh, to the work of uh, Scott Momade, A House Made of Dawn. Uh, the uh, for your information, uh, the work A House Made of Dawn by Scott Momade mm, got Award. Pulitzer Prize Award in 1969. Uh, it has double significance. Uh, in a recognition of the arrival on the American literary scene of a mature, sophisticated literary artist for the original Americans, it is a tribute to a novel for its eloquence and intensity. Remember, friends, now we have shifted our discussion with reference to the work of Momade, A House Made of Dawn. As I told you, A House Made of Dawn got Pulitzer Prize Award in the year 1969. It has double significance. It has a recognition of the arrival on the American literary scene of a matured, sophisticated literary artist from the original Americans. It is also a tribute to a novel for its eloquence and intensity of feeling, its freshness of vision and subject, its immediacy of theme. The novel grew out of a short story. The novel, A House Made of Dawn, grew out of a short story. The Well, name of short story. The name of the short story is The Well. TH is the WELL. Well. Mm, by the same author, Momade. Some of the characters and themes of the story are used again with refinements and elaboration in the novel. And there is, in this novel, there is a perceptible autobiographical element. In this novel, there is a perceptible autobiographical element, and in House Made of Dawn, the novelist uh, is searching for his roots, uh, and which may be observed in Tosama's speech, which deals with Koiwa history. This is two characters. The description of Gemage and Navajo cultures are based on the writer's personal experiences. So, tribal culture, based on tribal culture, this description of Gemage and Navajo cultures are based on the writer's personal experiences. Similarly, the landscape of the Southwest America and the way of life of the tribal people are important for the novelist in this novel. Again, I repeat, the as I have already told you, uh, the landscape of the Southwest America, the way of life of the tribal people in are important for the novelist in the novel uh, A House Made of Dawn. So, the depiction of witchcraft in the novel is only a recognition of a fact of life. Witchcraft, WITCHCRAFT, witchcraft. Witchcraft, which is observed among Jamaj, a tribal group, tribal people, Jamaj, informs the novel, and the description of witchcraft in the novel is only a recognition of a fact of life. Momade says, according to Momade, I quote, it is something, witchcraft, it is something which exists, it is part of the world we live in. Everybody has a deep conviction that it exists, witchcraft. The novel actually portrays a crisis of identity for the Indians. A House Made of Dawn, the novel that portrays a crisis of identity for the Indians. Abel, the central figure of the novel, Abel, Abel, the central figure of the novel, embodies this crisis. What crisis? Crisis of identity for the Indians. So the Indian veterans of World War II found it difficult to re-enter the native cultures. Abel is unable to determine his place in his community. Who? Abel, who represents Indian character. Abel, the central figure of the novel, A House, the Dawn, embodies this crisis of identity, for the Indians. Abel is unable to determine his place. He is unable to find a place in his community and define himself. Each generation must seek its identity afresh. Therefore, rightly, Momade observes we are what we are imagine. We are what we imagine. Our best destiny is to imagine, at least completely, who, when he reestablishes his relationship with his tribal culture, he is shaped in the novelist's own words. Abel, who is the central character in the novel, Abel, tries desperately to live in the present. Who? Abel, the main character in the novel, tries desperately to live in the present. Yet, He is hopelessly determined by the past. Abel is hopelessly determined by the past. He is disturbed by the past. He is actually obsessed by the past. The novel is a strong plea for a search for identity. The novel, as we have already known, this novel actually novel portrays crisis of identity for Indians, and therefore the novel is a strong plea for a search for identity and a realistic description of the forces which impede such a search. So for the structure of the novel, so for the structure of the novel, A House, the Dawn, the novel is enclosed between two Gemage formula words. Ah, uh, and Dipalo and uh, Sebado, which are used for opening and closing a nature American story. He uses two words of the tribe, Gemage tribe. The Gemage tribe, Gemage belong to a particular tribe. Through this device, the novelist suggests that his novel has the potential of a tribal myth. Very important to note, though through this device, through this formula, which formula? The novel is enclosed between two Gemage formula words, uh, DYPALOH, Dipalo, and QTSEDABA. Sabado. So see, these two actually devices, the novelist actually uh, tries to actually uh, underline, tries to highlight the potential of the tribal myth, the potential of the tribal myth. The he anticipates the closing and thus presents a circular structure. The novel, divided into four parts, is a complex and skillful juxtaposition of flashbacks, and uh, the main theme of this novel, the main theme of this novel seems to be the search for identity. So we have now a clear idea in mind that A House of the Dawn is a novel, the main theme of which seems to be the search for identity for an Indian, for Indians. And this can be analyzed and understood from the story of Abel. He is caught between two opposing cultures. Who? Abel is caught between two opposing cultures and is unable to come to terms with either. Abel seeks his identity. He is searching his identity. He seeks his identity in his own tribe. Who? Abel is searching his identity, seeks his identity in his own tribe before he faces modern American culture. Historically, his language, his struggle for identity in his own tribe is a crisis of a culture, is a crisis of a culture which refuses to allow any compromise amidst changing conditions. Particularly, we are discussing the problem of Abel. The problem he is facing, he is searching for identity, he is seeking for identity, and historically, his struggle for identity in his own tribe is a crisis of a culture, which a culture which refuses to allow any compromise, a culture which refuses to allow any compromise in the changing conditions. So, the older generation which opposes, the older generation which resists change would not allow any accommodation to the younger generation. We are discussing the theme of the novel, students. And the older generation which resists change would not allow any accommodation to the younger generation, which is eager to accept, which is eager to adapt to any change. Abel finds it difficult to accept fully uh, or adopt the customs of his culture. He moves away from his tribal culture. He moves into modern American culture. He suffers from a confusion of identity. Who? Abel, Abel, Abel. Ah, he suffers from a confusion of identity. He does not belong to either of the culture fully. His personal relationships are unsatisfactory. He returns to his tribe, hoping that the tribe would accept new values without sacrificing its traditional values. Ah, but it does not happen. It is not only Abel who seeks identity, but the Indian tribes, but the Indian tribes are also seeking their identity. That is how uh, Mamade in his novel projects the main character Abel, uh, which represents, which symbolizes uh, a, an identity, searching for his own identity in his own tribe. If not only Abel who seeks identity, but the Indian tribes are also seeking their identity in the new situation, in the changing situation, uh, uh, the brought changing situation brought on by the white man's culture, by the white man's culture. So the people in uh, the Walatova, to which Abel also belongs, a tribe. The people in Walatova, a culture, a tribal culture to which Abel belongs, are isolated in the isolated in the process of time, are isolated in the process of time. The people in that tribe to which Abel also belongs are isolated in the process of time. So they are able to keep their languages, they are able to keep their religions, customs largely intact. Abel grows up in such a society. Francisco in the novel is the preserver of the uh, 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 of a particular culture, namely Pueblo, a culture, Pueblo, Pueblo is a culture. Francisco in the novel, another character that who preserves the culture Pueblo. He is also a teacher who will pass on traditional wisdom to the next generation. Francisco. He teaches Abel and Vidal, his grandsons, to observe the sun, because most of their activities are guided by the sun. So, very common thing are taken by the novelist. Tribal cultures, tribal rituals, tribal the traditions are reflected in the novel, and that is why, as we make an analysis of the theme of the novel, we find that the characters which Mamade chooses, they uh, they actually take the help of the tribal culture, tribal tradition, tribal religions, and project in the as projected in the novel. Francisco, uh, who is a teacher by profession, Francisco, who is a teacher by profession, uh, actually he teaches Abel and his grandson Vidal to observe the sun, to worship the sun, 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 because it is believed that sun uh, is the main force that guide the activities of human beings. The sun and the land shape the rhythms of tribal life. That is what it is believed. The sun and the land, the sun and the land, uh, they shape, they actually determine, they change the way of tribal life. And Francisco's teaching impresses on Abel the crucial role of the environment, impresses his teaching, Francisco's teaching impresses Abel, and Abel believes that the believes the crucial role of sun, the crucial role of the land, mm, as the guiding force in life, as the shaper of life. Uh, Abel participates in several activities in his own tribe, like herding sheep, uh, hunting deer, and other ceremonies, tribal ceremonies. But Abel feels like an outsider in his community. This is his problem. He is keenly involved in the tribal culture. He is keenly involved in the activities of his own tribe, but there is a crisis of mixing with the community. He feels like an outsider. Although he is keenly involved in the activities of his own tribe, of the tribal group, he feels like an outsider in his own community. That is his problem. And he did not know who his father was. Surprisingly, he did not know who his father was. Who his father was. Ah, with the death of his mother and brother, he feels lonely. With his death of his brother and mother, he feels lonely. And his grandfather, ah, Francisco, domineers over him, uh, controls his actually education, regulates his social contacts. Therefore, Abel is unable to integrate fully into the community. He is not uh, uh, ready to accommodate himself with the community because of these circumstances. Because of these circumstances, the conflict between mm, a growing individual and unchanging tribal customs is also a conflict in uh, Pueblo culture, which is at the crossroads. So, Abel is unable to integrate fully. Abel is unable to accommodate himself fully mm, with his own community because of certain factors, because of the circumstances. Because his grandfather Francisco dominates over him, controls his education, regulates his social contact. Therefore, he does not feel comfortable. Abel finds that his grandfather's teachings are constraining, are binding. He must have, he must leave his tribe to find his identity. He decides that he will leave his tribe and he will find a new identity. Abel, during his boyhood, he witnessed an eagle carrying a serpent in its talons. Both these creatures have religious significance. Who serpents and I mean eagle. Both these creatures have religious significance for the particular culture. Pueblo Indians. Pueblo Indians. It represents a particular significance. It represents a particular actually meaning, and the serpent is the harbinger of water. It is worshipped by the Hopis in their snake dance. The eagle is endowed with supernatural power on its flights. Ah, so see, these are the how the actually truly he becomes successful. Momade becomes successful to articulate the thoughts and give a message to the Indian American literature, mm, actually it's selecting a number of actually themes, a number of subject matters, relating to their own tribe, relating to their own culture, relating to their own tradition, relating to their own actually beliefs. And therefore, the two, uh, I mean, eagle and serpent, he believes that these creatures have religious significance. Serpent signifies harbinger of water, whereas eagle signifies supernatural power. So it is celebrated in the eagle dance. Eagle signifies freedom, eagle signifies beauty, eagle signifies life for Abel. He envies the freedom of the bird to soar high in the sky. How fantastic his imagination is. He envies the freedom of the bird, freedom of the bird eagle to soar high in the sky. Abel does not understand fully the deeper meaning of the tribal rituals, like, for instance, killing animals. It is not a snapping of the uh, uh, tie between man and animal. If the killing is done as per traditional customs, his shame and disgust are due to his lack of understanding of tribal culture. So the failure of his grandfather's healing methods, which include prayers, chants, herbs, uh, uh, powders, portions, etc., religious occult cults, occult beliefs, to cure his backache depensables, who we are talking of Francisco, his grandfather healing method. He was taking the help of chants, mantra, herbs, tribal medicines, powders, potions, etc. He makes use of it to cure what? To cure backache, and which Abel does not like, does not believe. His distrust of the traditional ways. He does not, he actually does not believe it. Therefore, his distrust grows. The chasm between the grandfather and the grandson widens. The gap between both the older generation and the new generation actually widens. When Abel leaves his tribe, he rejects its rigid rule. He rejects the traditional rules, traditional beliefs, traditional custom. Symbolic of his rejection of his native culture, he wears shoes as he moves away. The tribal aspect of the land is such that they can wear shoes only if the heel is cut off. But he wanted to uh, be otherwise. He uses shoes so that the sacred earth is not injured. Abel disregards his rules. Abel is considered as disregarding the rule. Generally, people do not wear shoe, but Abel uses wears shoes, hmm, and which is a disregard to the rule, traditional rule. Ah, and the uh, novelist also makes use of images and symbols in the novel. Mamade's A House of Dawn is rich in imagery, it is rich in symbols. These devices mm, are used to clarify the meanings of an impressive way. Hmm. Uh, the setting of Abel's flight with uh, Martinez is significant. He is lying in shallow depressions in which there are weeds and small white stones, tops of long grey grass. Ah, so this is a feature of rituals. This is a feature of rituals related to initiation. The man is placed in a shallow grave from which he emerges a new person. And so, uh, Mama Day uses multiple images, uses multiple symbols to symbolize the characters in the novel. Uh, Water is another symbol in the novel. Abel lies on the beach close to the sea. Water is source of life. Water is the creation of life. Water is symbol of fertility. Abel's association with water shows his estrangement and the possibility of rebirth in his tribal culture. Like the Grunian, Abel too is out of his element when he is cut off from his tribal roots. As the fish find their way back to the sea, so Abel returns to the community in the end. As the fish cannot live without water, as the fish find their way back to the sea, Abel also does not find comfortable with the old culture and he returns to his community in the end. The moon is a recurring symbol in the novel. It is connected with the sea and initiation rites. Abel realizes that the moon is a unifying force. The moon is a controlling force in the universe. He learns that the moon controls both the sea and the land. The moon and the sun are instruments for the tribes, instruments for the tribes to mark the annual cycle of their activities. Therefore, friends, Momade mentions that the moon influences the growth of plants. The moon is also a symbol of rebirth in in the Indian views of the universe, land and sea, man and animal, fish and bird are all interrelated, are all interrelated. As Abel becomes aware of this subtle relationship of all elements in the universe, he feels that he too has a place in the universe and he is tied with other elements of the universe. So, Abel passes through the visionary, subconscious, ritualistic level to a rational plane, and in his return to his own community, uh, he finds, he begins his actually the hallucinatory visions aided by the nightmares, and therefore Abel returns to his community also takes place just before dawn. Just before dawn, Abel returns to his community also takes place just before dawn. There is a series of dawn images throughout the novel. Abel runs at dawn across the land at the beginning and at the end. After his struggle with his old culture, he lies on the beach. He awaits dawn. Symbolically, it represents a rebirth. Dawn and the idea of creation are linked in Abel's attempt at a creation song, as a creation song, and the dawn images pattern suggests the migration of a tribe, migration of a culture, and solution to the identity crisis, a cultural crisis, and its potential rebirth. Its potential rebirth. And this is how Mama Day becomes becomes uh, a craftsman to uh, highlight the tribal tradition, tribal cultures, tribal beliefs, tribal images existed in American culture, Indian American culture, and represents the projects the character in such a way, mainly through Abel and Francisco, uh, uh, to articulate the thought that prevailed upon the mind of that time. With this, we sum up the discussion. Thank you all for participation. You may get a question uh, uh, on this novelist. Uh, you can the question which you are supposed to get, which is probable to come. Uh, Discuss Abel's identity conflict. H, the underlying theme of the novel, his identity crisis as the underlying theme of the novel. You may get a question on it. Or explain significance of imagery in the novel. Explain imagery, significance of imagery in the novel. Hmm. Or you may get a simple question like justify the appropriateness of the title, a house made of dawn, uh, referring to certain images in the novel. Okay. Hello.
Yes, sir.
Mhm. Okay. Thank you
Yes,
all.
sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.